And we are live. Welcome to the ChatGPT fan club show. Just kidding. Uh, just kidding. Don't worry.
Everyone who's here.
Don't.
Man, for a
Don't wanna-
moment, I was thinking I'm in the wrong StreamYard.
Yeah,
event
I
here.
know.
Okay.
I know. It's like, how do we end up here?
Yeah.
No, this is a much anticipated show. The roots of this happened in the fall in some strange bar at an HR tech show. We were like,
It was a
you know what?
speakeasy, wasn't it? It was literally
Yeah,
a
we were.
speakeasy, Yeah.
Yeah, we were in a speakeasy and we were like, let's take this conversation and somehow like get it to the public, and will it work? The only thing is we're all sober now, so maybe it wasn't such a good idea after all. But anyhow, this is our HR tech blowout show, and I'm so pleased to have three people that are amongst my go-to. I think we all have people in this industry that we trust for sanity checks and gut checks. Here's three of my top ones: Bonnie, Stacey, and Brian. They need no introduction. I'm not going to bother with one because that's not what we do here. But what we're going to do today, they've all done their homeworks. This is going to be really cool. We're going to have a research reveal, and then we're going to get into buzzwords that we can't stand and why. And then we're going to attempt to try to give HR leaders some actual advice they can use. So that's going to be the real interesting challenge. But anyway, so as always, your comments, questions, snarky observations are welcome. Hi, Meg. Good to see Meg in the chat. I'm sure we're going to hear from her again before this is all said and done. So looking forward to that.
Can I already thank her for her leadership, for being first to put in a
Oh,
comment?
yeah.
I mean, her atomic leadership, because
Yep,
she is at the
yep.
center of commentary right now.
Indeed. I'm sure she will have no shortage of opinions as we go forward. So, yes, and I have a couple of hot topics from my inbox for you all. I'll see if I can stump you with those. But I really want to start with where we are in 2023. I think it's a really challenging time for HR leaders. That goes without saying. But what does the data show? So, all right, I'm just going to pick. Let's start with Stacey. Stacey, you do a ton of research in this area.
Yes.
Give us some what you've been learning. What are some of the surprises? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'll talk a couple of things that I don't think are going to be big surprises because we did talk about it in the fall, but then I'll add some stuff that we've done in the analysis recently. So one of the things we definitely found was that, we're in a moment where I think we're seeing payroll, time management flip. We were sort of the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen a lot of core HRMSs flip as far as people who had something in place and now they were replacing it. We're kind of, at least in our data, we're through that cycle for the most part, right? And now we're hitting payroll and time management systems. And I think there was this moment when I put that slide up at HR Tech where there was like, how many people are flipping their payroll? Because it was like over 50% who were kicking the tires and thinking about it. And when you got down to SMB organizations, and I say SMB and mid-market, right? Like under 5,000, that jumps to like 60%, and under 500, that jumps to like 65%. So it gets bigger as you go down market, which actually is usually the flip on that. So I think the big wow is people are ready to make big moves with payroll, and I don't think they've been there for a long time. The thing that we've analyzed on top of that in the last couple of months that most people aren't seeing is that they're also taking money away from areas that I think we've thought for a long time were sort of we weren't going to lose money. So this experience platform space is starting to lose money. The performance management space, people are taking money away from it because they're trying to figure out where they're heading, right? Some of those areas that were for a long time kind of seen as, worth sort of talking more about. I think they're worth it because they're going to have a lot of conversation, but money is leaving those areas, at least from what we're seeing in our data. I'd be interested to hear what everybody else has. So that's our big money shot. Like, where's the money going? Where's it's coming from? So.
Absolutely. I told the panel, I said, if we can resolve layoffs versus employee experience by the end of the show, then I'll be really impressed. Yeah. By the way, I want to let folks know that I have a BS meter alert that I can show. So if I feel like we're getting out of control, that is available to me.
Stories for Brian.
Yeah. Brian in particular may be a little concerned about that. Anyhow, Bonnie, let's go to you. What kind of data are you seeing?
Yeah, so I would echo Stacey's sentiment and data points around this area of payroll. So a lot of interest in switching payroll systems, which has been latent in years past. I would say there is a resurgence in looking at existing software and optimizing it. I think every company is, budgets are really being looked at, and this idea of spending more on new software is less in vogue than it has been in years past. Every conversation is how is this project going to help me sell more? Or how is this project going to help me ensure that our company doesn't lose money or reduces risk, as opposed to, buying something new. And so I think there's a demand for, some consultant services around existing software. So we're seeing a lot more projects. How do you optimize what I already have, or ensure that we're using and maximizing the investment in what we have in place right now, as opposed to buying new things?
Brian, your thoughts?
So I'll echo the last thing Bonnie brought up on the buyers are looking pretty, closely at these kind of expenditures. Am I picket fencing? Or can you hear me okay?
Yeah, your cam seems to be freezing a little, but the audio seems okay.
Okay, sorry. Everything's kind of going hinky up here. I think it was your BS meter didn't know how to react with me talking. So anyway, but back on, yeah, they're tight. And in fact, I've had one deal basically canceled in the middle of a selection because they're going to conserve capital and try and ride out a perceived recession. I had another one where the client basically put my proposal through, like open heart surgery, and wanted to only do just a small piece of things right now because they're still trying to get line up support from other executives in the company. So that's real. The other thing, though, that's going on, and nobody really likes to talk about it at HR shows, I don't have a whole lot of love for a lot of speakers at HR shows because they always come up with these fluffy, no content topics, like engagement. It's not just for weddings anymore. Crap like that doesn't move the needle at all for my clients. And in fact, I use this pyramid all the time that starts off on the bottom at dysfunctional, moves up to functioning, then process excellent, then transformative or whatever at the top. And I ask clients to self-score themselves and tell me where they're at. And to this day, with all the progress that's being made with digitalization and everything else, a good 75% of them are still at the functioning level. I mean,
Yep.
The HR stuff's getting done, but it's like sausage making and legislation. You don't want to peek behind the curtain and see how it's actually happening. It's a pretty scary kind of situation. And so the shame in all of this is that I'm not sure with all the new tech coming out that we're having the right conversation in a lot of places. It's really about how are you actually even going to get to become process excellent is the first challenge right there. And I don't know that we're making a lot of headway there.
Yeah, and Brian, to your point, you've been a little bit of a buzzkill at events, asking vendors questions about payroll and finance integration.
Yes.
And this seems like this is actually, it's like, oh crap, Brian's going to ask us about this again. Why have you been harping on that so much?
It's still a major problem, and let's add to it. The other problem is we still don't have anything even close to what I'd call a global payroll solution. Yes, we have a lot of providers that have a network of in-country providers that are part of a solution, if you will, but it's an ungainly confederation kind of way of approaching solutions. So yeah, I got a lot of frustrated clients who are looking for nirvana, and they're having to settle for something really quite a bit less. And sorry, I'm Debbie Downer on this point, but frankly, people want this stuff, and the vendors, instead of responding to these very practical, realistic kind of issues, we're still getting we're having somebody running off, creating an attaboy certificate application, for an employee engagement module.
So can I ask questions? Am I allowed to, John?
Yeah. We're kind of opening up now, so you guys
Okay.
can start interrupting each other and ignoring me.
Because is it even possible to get to a global payroll? That's the question, right? Like you said that we don't have a global payroll. And after sort of going through all this and looking at all the options, because country by country, everything's so different, can you get a global payroll? Is it feasible, do you think?
I think we could do a whole lot better job of actually pulling the basic information together that goes through some standard interface that then could deal with some of these other systems and bring it back. But right now, we don't really have quite all the kind of timekeeping, record reporting, the integrations, the interfaces. We don't have a mechanism to keep it all working right. There's a few vendors that can actually sit in between, but either their cost structure is tough, or it's hard for clients to make corrections. And if there ever was an application that's just chock-a-block full of people, correcting time reports or correcting the expense entries, after the payroll's already been run, and then how all that eventually gets fed to the general ledger, and then they got to go back in there and do brain surgery trying to straighten out the journal entries that got all screwed up or corrupted when the time entry was changed kind of post facto. So there's the administration around that, I think, is what needs to get addressed. I agree to your point, though. There's so much variability in payroll. We'll all be dead and buried. Well, I will be certainly before you guys, but before we ever get this kind of thing fixed. I see Meg's bringing the atomic leadership. Okay.
I can't comment back to anybody on the comments, but I'm loving what we're getting there.
Yeah, I expect the comment thread to heat up. Folks, please press the panelists with your HR hot button issues. Let's see if we can stump these folks. Tracy, nice to see you again. Look forward to seeing you in the video show chats this year. Please make your presence felt as usual. Can I just ask you all, like, I was really struck after listening to your research, because I went to some HR tech shows this fall and followed a lot of this stuff, and I didn't hear messaging that lined up hardly at all with what you're talking about. Do you think part of that is just because the economy has shifted so much, and so by the next round of HR shows, maybe there'll be a little more, or am I wrong there? Because I'm kind of feel like you're hitting on a lot more practical stuff than I was hearing from the main stage and from the sessions.
I think that the Common Collective has really shifted since the fall because of all of the layoffs in tech. And I think that what was, prepared and, what we heard at some of the tech shows, was on the front end of some of these real economic, things that hit the fan in terms of the layoffs and, recession fears and things like that. I think that heated up in October, November, December timeframe.
Yeah. And I would have to, I don't think it was, you always have to think about events, they're planned months in advance. People have got to get their topics in. They've got to be based off of what people did 6 months to a year beforehand, right? So if you think about where people were at when what they were presenting on was conversations that were taking place in the midst of the greatest talent gap we've had in over 2 centuries, right? So, I think the conversation has to be that we oftentimes think a little too much about sort of where we were at and not enough about where we're heading. And when you've got to look at data, you've got to be thinking, I think, about, we have to have a leg in both worlds, because the historical part's going to help inform, but we oftentimes let that lead our conversations. And that's what I saw a lot of this fall, was that we were leading with what we had just gotten through, instead of talking about look, it's happened. We're here. This is the market. Now, where are we going from here? Right.
So, to her credit, Stacey conflated 2 things in one response. So, spoken like a great analyst, by the way. So I'm going to respond to both of the points. The one about have the tone and topics, I guess, for some of the shows. There's a change. I will tell you, the last show I was at about a week ago did not have a marching band. So apparently the tightening economy is having an effect on the user conferences. I see John's going to write that down, but
Was there at least like a piccolo player or something, or?
no, they just dispensed with. They did have the the ubiquitous DJ in the corner off on the far stage right. You can't escape that. That's just there to make sure your eardrums are bleeding before the first speaker comes up on stage. But the other thing Stacey alluded to was this thing about, we were coming off this deal of trying to find talent, one of the toughest labor markets when we're out there. I'm going to probably call BS. So go ahead and put the flashing meter up.
Oh, we're going to go for that. All right. Woohoo.
So I'm going to self-select on that.
We have our first BS alert. Excellent. Brian, nice job.
So I think
cool.
I'm appalled at how little originality a lot of clients put into when it comes to figuring out how they're going to find this talent. And I'll give you a good example. Corporate accounting organizations for decades, when they're looking for new people to bring into corporate accounting, what do they always insist? Everybody has to have like Big Four experience. That's it. Now, Big Four companies complain they can't get talent because they're running out of college graduates tap, but will they ever go look at corporate accounting people? And the answer is no. So you got two parties that change with the speed of the tectonic plates moving on the earth. And neither one of them has ever decided, maybe we need to rethink what we're looking for and what we're asking for when we put together like our requirements in Indeed or whatever. And the idea of how they're searching for talent has not even entered the vocabulary in a lot of firms, and they're still trying to do the same old thing the same old way. And like that Einstein definition of insanity, they're surprised that they don't get the same results. That's a real problem, is they haven't changed the job description in 30 or 40 or 100 years. So of course, if it wasn't working for the last 50 years, we'll just keep trying and maybe we'll get a bite on it. In fact, I had a client just recently tell me they'll give an offer to just about any experienced hire that applies on their website. Now think about that for a moment. And the last time I ever heard anything that ridiculous was an old client decades ago that was hiring people for a bakery they had. And I said, well, how do you know who you're going to hire out of all the applicants? And the guy said, swear to God, I put a mirror under their nose, and if it fogs up, we hire them. So I don't think tech's going to lead this generation to change for the kind of problem you brought up, Stacey. I think companies have to fundamentally change and not just tweak the process. Figure out who you're hiring, why you're hiring, how you're going to go after them, and everything else.
Well, I did say it was the biggest gap in 2 centuries, because I do believe that we're in a hole that we've created ourselves, right? So yeah.
I just pasted into the chat. I don't think this goes on LinkedIn, so you have to search it. But if you want more of Brian's stylings on this topic, he published a bit of a scorcher on Diginomica called HR in 2023, Recruiting Where Creativity Goes to Die. So that's a nice upbeat title from Brian, so you can search that out.
Actually, guys, I get along marvelously with clients and we have a great rapport and everything else. I'm not the curmudgeon you're painting me out to be totally today here, John.
But it was kind of interesting.
I write those pieces. Yes, I do.
It was interesting though, because one of the points you made in the piece is like, why are you insisting on Big Four experience when the first couple of years in the Big Four you're basically doing photocopies and stuff like that? Like what? Why is that experience so impressive? Just real quick on that topic. Tracy says that payroll is hard and all the fire and attention is all about recruiting and candidate experience. And she follows up, says, because of the market, plus it is easier to make the experience stuff sexy than it is to make global payroll standardish. And that's probably true. But at the same time, I do think part of being a good enterprise professional is making tough problems the sexy problems and not giving into the sort of cushy topics all the time. But anyhow.
And I think payroll is going to be more sexy in the coming months than we're giving it credit for. I know people are up in arms about what's happening with on-demand payroll, but that earned wage access, I think, is going to shift how we're thinking about payroll. not because it's the concept of getting paid immediately is that's got a whole other side effect, but to the issues that Brian mentioned about all of the red tape around fixing your system when something goes wrong with time management and time cards gets shortened and relieved by the fact that I can now do paychecks on demand without having to rerun a bunch of stuff, and my audits get cleaned up. I would love to see from the audience if those were the kind of comments we were hearing about why people were thinking this is the time to change payroll, is that there's newer things out there now that we can do cooler things with. So
Absolutely. We got another comment from Tracy that's going to like block everyone from the screen. She says she worked at one of those firms a long time ago. Like the idea of kids out of school fighting with GPA to get that first great job. It feeds the hierarchy, but they aren't ready for Gen Z. They aren't impressed by any of that. So interesting gap there. And Meg is back. Earned wage access is a big opportunity with modern payrolls.
You know, I was just thinking, if Meg really wanted to have a blowout at the next Success Factor Success Connect show, she could just have a keynote with the four of us up there talking smack for 30 or 40 minutes, and probably have get an SRO kind of thing going.
Only if the audience can do this.
Yeah.
then it might actually work. So okay. So I want to give y'all a chance to vent a little bit of spleen here, and the audience can do as well. Let's have a bit of catharsis and go through your most hated HR tech buzzwords. Who wants to start?
Because you're already painting me as the curmudgeon, I'll go ahead and start. I don't know if there's a term I hate. Quiet quitting, and I'm going to come up with something called noisy quitting, and that's the.
So what's noisy quitting?
Well, it's kind of that take this job and shove it kind of attitude. But what's going on right now, and no one likes to talk about it, is all the people who are showing you their disgust with your firm and its pay policies by just packing up and walking out the door. And this study that Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta did, that Bloomberg reported, showed there's at least a 3 percentage point difference between the pay raises that job stayers got versus job switchers. The switchers are the smart money people on this phenomenon right now. But yeah, forget the quiet quitting. That's the focus on the wrong deal. We need to talk about the noisy quitting, because all you're hearing is that door slamming with people going in and out of it and, leaving the company, creating that problem that Stacey talked about, which is, where are we going to get this talent to replace all the other talent we've been running off and, by the sackfuls. Anyway.
We're going to find them under the rocks that we're looking at, right? That we're not looking at. I'm going to throw a softball to Bonnie, because here's my big one that's driving me up the wall right now. And it's been around for a while, so it's not a new one. I think we need to rethink the term system integrators, because I don't think they are actually doing the integration job.
Okay, Stacey, you are going to, we did not plan this at all. My buzzword that I hated was integration. So that is my buzzword, and
oh my goodness,
we are on the same wavelength here.
But how do you feel about seamless integration? Does that make you even more excited?
Yeah,
seamless integration, which basically means that the two systems can be on the same browser, right?
Yeah, exactly. We now have defined integration. If two companies have had a handshake, I'm integrated with them.
Yeah.
I mean, that is how things are being defined at this point. The whole idea of standard integration, you can also interchange that with seamless. It can mean anything. It could mean I just had dinner with the sales rep at another company. I'm integrated with them.
It was mentioned. So I told on stage that about 25% of our comments mentioned nickel and diming or cost cutting, or things were costing too much. We did account for integration being a problem, like in the why my system doesn't meet my business needs. It was mentioned 250 times in our 5,000 plus comments. Like I'm like, that's a lot of times to mention one word that everybody's talking about, right?
Tracy says consultants that don't consult. Looks like she's about to go off on a tear. So when integration is like such a pain point, what in particular like is slowing customers down here? What kind of roadblocks do they run into over this topic?
You guys probably know better than I do. We get the comments on it. Bonnie and Brian see it up front, right?
How much time do we have here?
The big pain points with yeah. So what we see is integrations that are poorly defined. How does this actually work? What does this integration mean? Is it an interface? Is it a file that's being passed back and forth? Is it an API? The world's your oyster when it comes to the term, and I think it's one of the biggest disappointments during implementation is when you realize that integrations don't happen the way that you thought that they would. And, and that's quite frankly, that's a thing that we hear over and over. It's what we heard all of last year as probably the biggest, reason an implementation was not satisfactory.
Hallie's on fire here with her comments too.
Custom fields, one-way APIs. Tracy, too much lift and shift. It is hard sometimes to get clients to understand the opportunity change is hard.
Well, and Stacey started off hers by saying system integrators. And, and you automatically assume with the term system integrator that their specialty is integration, right? That's that's the way we refer to them. And that actually isn't what they're doing in most cases. They're there to help define the blueprint and help with the digital transformation. The least of what they do is, hooking systems together. So
I'll add a couple to that list too, which is the idealization of the API. That like, oh, we have APIs, so you're all set. And then this peril of cloud software, right? The idealization of SaaS of like the problem with updates is when shit breaks,
yes.
Right? And so you're updating your software and absorbing new functionality, but then your integrations break, and that's not cool.
Well, I'm gonna. Not only do I agree with what Bonnie and Stacey are saying, and y'all better write that down because that comment doesn't come out of my mouth that often, But this thing about integration, what's really perplexed me is. Yeah, there are a lot of people that claim that. There are a lot of consultants who talk the big vision kind of thing, about, we need to have a seamless, integrated, full digital fingerprint of everything going on. But they have no idea how it actually happens. And I had a CIO explain this stupidity that he runs into from these alleged integrators. He was saying that what a lot of them don't understand is they grew up on smartphones, and they think that if you build an app on a smartphone, that magically somehow it just got integrated to some back-end system. And they have no idea how that happens. Their concept of knowing, is this a one-way or a two-way integration? Is it real-time, async, synchronous? What is it going to do? And how do you translate something like off the smartphone? How does it eventually get edited and validated before it ever gets to post on some kind of production database in some monster server? They have no idea about the plumbing. And the corollary is hiring an integrator that doesn't have the plumbing skill. It's like hiring an architect to necessarily do automotive repair. I mean, they may be highly skilled, but they don't know squat about what makes an internal, combustion engine work. So I spend a lot of time on two ends of client projects. I help with the big stuff on where we're going to go. And I'm over there just pushing them like crazy to get out of their comfort zone. And then I end up having to roll up my shirt sleeves and help them figure out how we're going to do the plumbing, how we're, what's going in the hot water lines, what's going in the cold water lines, all that kind of stuff. And how's it going to work? And what's going to get connected? And I'm the only one I ever see put in like RFPs, like these are the specific integrations that we're going to need. And I know it drives clients nuts when I'm bugging them like, no, I need to know all of the applications. I need to know all of the best of breed things. I need to know all of the mobile apps. And if you really want to see something wild, talk to somebody who does campus recruiting, because what you have to think about is there's an entire other ecosystem of, I call them the arms. It's what the students have access to, all of their databases. They've got they talk to their tribe of people. They're using TikTok, Instagram, and all this other stuff. And HR departments have never even bothered to find out, what do candidates really say about us on social media? And when how many candidates are posting your interview questions or answers, the best answers to your interview stuff? And they don't know. They really don't know. So we've got an arms race of technology, and if you can't solve the internal problems with the integrations, I guarantee you have no clue how to deal with all the stuff that's happening outside of the firm and all the information that's being passed around by all these issues out there. And Tracy, you're a woman after my heart. I've liked all your comments, and you're absolutely right. The campus stuff is absolutely no joke.
Oh, her best though is there is no glitter and unicorn solution. Come on now.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that one in a sec. Meg says integration woe, the implications of scale. What works in a single record won't necessarily work at scale. And then Tracy's saying sometimes when clients don't understand that little changes can break an integration, they make changes, manage templates, and are surprised they just broke it. There is no glitter and unicorn solution. Oh, come on, Tracy. I thought I saw a unicorn in my email inbox just recently, which brings me to my little contribution to our hype conversation. Some emails that I get, I guess they just take a little piece of my soul, and I can never get it back. And the headline for this one that threw me into a tailspin, I'm going to read this subject header to you. Ready for this one? AI-based games foster inclusion, which undeniably improves employee retention.
Out.
So anyway, as far as unicorns and magic bullets are concerned, it looks like AI-based games are what's going to keep employees engaged and retained. So Brian, you wrote that column recently about how you engage employees. It's not about salary. You're so right. It's about AI games.
No comment.
Well, although I will say that if you tie that AI game to a really funny TikTok about your boss, it'll engage a lot of people. To Brian's comment. We're seeing.
Yeah, exactly. I just think it's so, I mean, what the I mean, so like, I understand the gamification concept, but why does it have to be AI games? Like, what the hell are you talking about AI games? Speaking of AI games, Brian, I was expecting you to throw ChatGPT for HR under the bus during this segment. So am I preempting you a little bit?
I mean, yeah, I'd love to. I'd really love to push it, but I got to stay on that one stupid story you just brought up. For just a
Okay.
moment. I know I shared this with you, but just because somebody can put all those buzzwords like your AI, in recruiting and everything together into a sentence or a press release doesn't necessarily mean that anyone should give it any credence. Just like that story I shared with you, the marketing pitch of someone wanted to sell me backup software for my Valentine's Day gift to my wife. Like, why that anybody thinks that has anything to do with Valentine's Day? It's just clearly one of those things. Just because somebody could put two things together in a press release doesn't make it right. And I
Wait,
think
you didn't try giving backup software to your wife? I was hoping to hear a report, progress report on that.
The only kind of carbon-based anything my wife would want would be in a diamond, not a piece of backup software for a laptop or whatever, So no, not interested in that. Not going there. ChatGPT, one terribly overhyped kind of technology, and we're still riding the uphill hypotron, waiting to get to the, finish its acceleration cycle, and then we're going to hit the, what is it? The trough of the valley of despair.
It's coming. The trough of disillusionment. Yeah.
We know that's coming, and then eventually we'll get to, what do they call that? The plateau of optimization.
The plateau of productivity.
Yeah.
Oh, productivity. Okay. So
yeah.
Yeah. And the thing that just makes me cringe is opening the inbox in the morning, and because to your point, John, I know there's going to be some PR person who couldn't even spell ChatGPT, and now has decided it's going to be the anchor for every press release they want to send me. And I just got to sit there, open up Outlook, and just start hitting delete, 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 because this stuff is just it's not ready for prime time.
So let me take a different take on the ChatGPT conversation, because I think I agree with you that it's a lot of BS out there in the market. Feel free to put the BS up. But I've been watching some of the threads on the conversations, and the most interesting comments are the people who are using it not for, are not using it for what you're talking about, their PR and their press and to write their term paper and whatever else, but are using it as an aggregator of what's out in the market. Don't you dare be laughing at my BS.
No, I'm laughing at Meg Barrett's comment. Anyway.
Oh man! Oh, we need ChatGPT. Oh,
it absolutely will be in the trapezoid. Yep.
I like that very much. But on a serious note, I do think that we're going to see this technology similar to, like, if we're trying to compare it to like iPhones, and when they first came out was like, can you make a good phone call on it? It had nothing to do with making a good phone call on it. It was what that technology did underneath and to bring all the applications. I think it's going to be more of a search technology, more of an aggregator than it is this replacement of people writing. That's my take on it. But I'd love to hear anybody else's comment on that.
Well, so one of my friends from college is prominently involved in this debate. His name's Gary Marcus. I've been spending some back channel time with him, and I'm actually sort of becoming a freelance data scientist only so I can debunk some of this crap. And I don't think you're wrong about that. And in fact, enterprise search is somewhat of an interesting potential use case. But I do disagree profoundly that it's a consumer search tool because of its inability to tell truth from fiction. It's dumb. It doesn't understand the difference. And so the data sets for consumer search are too big. I mean, look at the New York Times story today about this ridiculous 2-hour conversation this reporter had with the Bing chatbot. They started questioning his marriage and stuff like that. It just doesn't know. It's just completely useless for consumer search. I think for enterprise search, there may be some potential. At the moment, ChatGPT doesn't have that information, so it has to evolve to the point where you could ingest company-specific information. But I could actually see that maybe being somewhat useful. I think the thing that I just would want to get across from my research is that this notion that, it's going to keep getting better and better, that's part of the collective delusion right now. This is not going to keep getting better and better. This is essentially one form of deep learning that is about to hit a wall. It's already been trained on the whole internet. There's no more data to give it to make it any smarter than it is. It's a dumb bot. Hello. But as such, it's still a useful productivity tool in certain contexts. It's just that people are just think, oh my God, in 2 years, what's it going to be if it's so amazing now? It's like, no, it's not going to get any better. And I mean, look, they're working on trying to fix some of the guardrails, but even that, like some of the stuff it spews out is incredibly full of hate and invective because, like I said, it's a dumb bot. It doesn't understand what it's saying. So, whatever. I think the one good thing about this is that it forces us to bear down on what does this really mean? And I think that is a useful conversation as far as like, we're going to have to work alongside machines. So let's figure out how they can actually help us. And I suspect in a few years' time, there will be some nice HR use cases for this.
So I'm going to give a positive for ChatGPT, and I'll tell you how I'm using this that I found extremely beneficial. So I'm looking at tons of customer feedback that was written in text-based form, and I have to synthesize, 1,000 different various comments about a topic. So I've actually used it where I've talked to ChatGPT, said, here's the comments that I need to synthesize. And I've read each one of those individually, but what that ChatGPT did was take all of the themes that I didn't necessarily see through my read through it and very systematically put those together. And I think it can be very useful, especially. So I'm looking at it from, what I do is I'm looking at customer feedback about implementations and enterprise software. However, if an HR person, if they were able to train the tool, obviously in a closed loop private situation on employee feedback, all of a sudden it's able to interpret themes and things like that, that a single HR person wouldn't be able to necessarily comb through themselves. So I think there's a
Sure.
ton of application for especially employee feedback and engagement that is now possible.
Yeah, and if you have a clean, it's all about the data set. If you have a clean, valuable data set that you can feed into it, the synthesis abilities are quite good. And so at the moment, that use case isn't quite ready for prime time, but it will be. And I think that will be a useful enterprise use case. People who are using it for Google, I would just warn you that it gets basic biographies wrong. Like, so as long as you're happy, like with factually inaccurate results, then sure. But that doesn't easily get fixed because in the consumer context, it's dealing with this vast amount of data. And so that's part of the problem is that you have to be able to control the data set a little better if you want a better output from the tool. I'm all in favor of talking about it. I'm just a little frustrated by the over the moon conceptions of what it's capable of. That's my only problem.
I think the privacy issues have to be addressed before we dump all of our information into it, right?
Yep.
A million percent.
Yeah, that tends to get very quickly. It's out there. I read through some of the agreements, and there's nothing in there that really controls where that data can go and what people can do with it.
Indeed. But privacy is going to be a classic HR issue no matter what going forward, right? I mean, all these employee listening tools, same kinds of stuff, work surveillance. We're in pretty uncharted territory in a lot of ways, right? I mean, ChatGPT is just one aspect of that.
Yeah.
But if anyone sees some interesting HR ChatGPT use cases, by all means, let's put them in the chat. And because we're about to shift gears to a more constructive part of the conversation where we try to make sense of what's good. This was intended to be more of a cathartic exercise in like buzzwords to avoid. So that's just a little bit of why that reaction is a little bit strong on my part. But I've just kind of had it with the idealization, because to me, and Brian, you wrote a good piece about this recently, but it's like so much of, I think our job is to look behind this stuff with that right combination of skepticism and intellectual curiosity. And that's the conversation that I want to have. And I'm happy to have it around ChatGPT. I just don't want to have a conversation about like, oh my God, it's the most incredible thing. And, come on. Tracy says, I think that the layer of I watch a lot of sci-fi is skewed what it is. I like the idea of sifting through data, but I don't like the idea of a bot skimming resumes and see who moves forward. It's really interesting too, because Stacey, when I had you on my show a while back, I thought you had a pretty balanced view about the use of AI for various kinds of recruitment and screening. You weren't like completely opposed to that in all cases. Obviously, that's a major issue of sort of AI and recruitment and such that goes well beyond ChatGPT. Does anyone have any comments on where they'd like that technology to go or not go in HR?
The only thing that I think, and you and I talked about this last time, but I think anytime you put AI in place, you have to have a control group in place as well. The thing I think we forget is that we're experimenting with the data still, right? Like there's no tried and true. And so anytime you're doing like a resume sort of sorting, that kind of thing, right? Make sure you've got a human model that you're putting it through as well to see how those compare. That would be my big thing. Don't run away from it, as we said, but don't let it own your process.
I'd echo Stacey's comments. I'll probably be more brutal in, there is a predecessor technology. No one wants to use those 3-letter acronyms, the ATS, the applicant tracking system, which is supposed to be like scoring resumes. And every vendor tells me, oh, but we're doing more than keyword search. And then I find out all they're doing is keyword search. And those systems throw out so many great people because they may not have described their job and roles and skills they had in the past using the same taxonomy that your company uses, because your company's kind of it's an entity of one. And I don't know that a bot is going to be, or an AI tool is necessarily going to be more accurate because it's based on kind of what did it train on. And if it trained on past applicants that a company has hired or brought in, it's going to replicate that bias against a new crop of resumes coming in the door. So I agree with Stacey. You definitely need to have a control group, not once, but probably like every month or two. You need to pull a bunch of resumes, at random, run them through the tool, and at the same time run them by your own recruiting staff and find out, like, who did you like? And if the results don't match, there's a problem.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most companies don't do any of that effort. They just accept the thing right out of the box, and then they're back complaining, I can't find any qualified talent. Well, that's because your ATS threw it all in the garbage can, before you ever even looked at it. Anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry for
I actually got a halfway decent email on this topic in my inbox, believe it or not. It says, "Hi John, as you know, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission released its draft strategic enforcement plan in January, outlining its priorities through 2027, and it says the agency will prioritize investigations of potential discrimination stemming from the use of AI tools in recruitment, screening, hiring, promotion, and other employment decisions. It's the first time AI has been referenced in the enforcement plan." So that's kind of interesting, right? Like, it's not regulatory yet, but it's starting to show up a little bit on the regulatory, framework. And so I think that's a good wake-up call for HR people.
Good sign.
That's not the only place the regulations coming in. It's hitting all the video interviewing technologies and the software related to that analyzes, like, are you telling the truth or not? And automatically scoring based on what it thinks the either truthfulness or the ability of the job seeker to actually prove that they have this skill. And, so there's all this interpretation going on behind the scenes, automatically scoring of somebody based on a video interview. And that stuff's not got a lot of time or science behind it right now. So that's kind of a regulatory risk waiting to bite somebody, unless you've got a bulletproof indemnification clause with the vendor to protect you in the event you get, slapped with a problem, a fine, have you.
I'd be interested in knowing, Bonnie, because you work with a lot of the implementers and the integration system integrators. Are they taking on these kind of systems as part of their implementation process? Or are they kind of hands off and only focusing on the enterprise core systems and because what I'm finding is that we've got these very sophisticated people who are doing implementations at our core level, and we don't have as sophisticated teams working on this kind of stuff that you're just talking about, Brian.
I think everybody's talking about it, but I don't think that many of the consulting firms have the expertise to lend just yet. I think it's an area that, is a very specific domain that, I think the SIs would love to have a service around it and have, folks who could implement that type of thing, but don't today. There's not a lot of people with that expertise out there today. It's expensive.
Yeah, well.
So you're saying those 3 years I spent installing Tesseract in the early 90s don't count?
Well, you could apply for some jobs and find out, Brian. I know you've done that in the past with very mixed results.
I'll never forget in 2008, I got his resume to help a client review candidates for a project. And he claimed in 2008, to have 15 years experience implementing Workday, which is interesting since the company was only founded in 2005, 3 years earlier. But, I'm just wondering, would ChatGPT catch, something like that? I would love to train ChatGPT in critiquing a resume. But anyway, that's probably not, that's an application that's one application too far.
Meg's putting forth the diabolical concept of truthiness, which I'm afraid we've probably already arrived at in our society over truth. But anyhow, truthiness scares me a little bit, Meg, so I'm gonna keep my distance from that. Well, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but what I really do want to do, though, is to try to shift gears a little bit into sort of what you think HR leaders should be actioning. Like, where are the opportunities? It's obviously a difficult plate of stuff right now, but where should we go from here in a constructive direction?
Constructive. Boy, you're asking a lot of us today, John. It's Friday afternoon.
I know.
So I had a slide, and I don't know if it actually popped up or not. Did anything come up, guys? No?
No. Do you want to? You could try a screen share if you want. Just
I did, but I don't know if it's popping up at all.
let me just try to see if I can help you out with that.
I don't know if I'm getting. ChatGPT is probably preventing me from sharing this.
Yeah, I don't see it offhand.
Well,
Sorry, we should have rehearsed that.
I've been trying, behind the scenes, but anyway. So here's what's kind of, I think, interesting. You're looking ahead. I see that there have been about 7 generations of HCM solutions on the market. Going all the way back, the first generation, those were all the batch proprietary kind of things. And all they did was just automate a paper and manual kind of process. The 5th generation is where we had all the cloud stuff popping up. And I even had an argument earlier this week with a CIO who still doesn't believe in multi-tenancy, if you can believe that. Okay, so Luddites reign supreme still. They're still out there. The 6th generation has been what I would call the smart HCM deal. It's where we're trying to come up with cool analytics, smart analytics. There's some big data driving some of the stuff, and some predictive workflows and things like that, predictive training suggestions but it's all been around getting smart, using a lot of the data that was already in maybe an HCM solution to begin with. Stacey's got a cat walking behind her.
My cat. Oh yeah, he's about to attack.
Well, what's happening right now is there's a 7th generation coming out, and I call it the rethought HR generation, because this is where you're going to process automate the bejesus out of everything. You're going to have everything digital, and you're going to have AI everywhere. And if you show me a piece of paper or a spreadsheet or some SharePoint folder or whatever, then I know you're not at the 7th generation yet. And one of the things that has to be there in the 7th generation is everything damn well better be integrated, because we can't have these breaks and gaps where stuff falls off and then we got to go build a special schedule in Excel, and then we got to write another spreadsheet to make sure we can reconcile all the data and entries and everything else. There are companies that are stuck. They still haven't made it to the 5th generation around the cloud. Most of them still haven't finished out the 6th generation about creating a smart kind of world with a lot of intelligence that is picking up out of the information. And I'm not sure we're quite ready yet for the 7th generation. I'm not even sure the vendors have built out everything that's required there, but that's where the market's moving.
Yeah.
Couple comments. Holly says there's been a lot of HR tech innovation. I think HR leaders need a little time to synthesize and optimize before digesting more tech. And then Tracy's saying she talks process pain points and fixes. The more she speaks in plain language to HR leaders, the better. I'm detecting a pattern here.
I'm going to give my sense is actually more for the vendors, because I think there's some work that the vendors need to do that we have left on the table. So I think actually all the feature functionality integrations, the vendors have actually got tools that will do that for the most part. I think we're right now in a process where consultants and advisors aren't doing a lot of the work they need to do to tie the back ends together. So I think there's a bit of work there. But I do think where the vendors are falling down is they're not putting in place enough guidance for the people who maintain and manage these systems on a everyday basis. What we're seeing over and over again in our research is that we're seeing this constant almost cry for help from the people who are left after the implementers leave, right? That they can't figure out how to get the configurations right or how to get the integrations updated. And if we can get an end user to figure out how to go through a multi-6 level step performance management process with walkthroughs and videos and WYSIWYGs, whatever we can do, right? And we can't give the same time and energy to the HR support, administration, and managers to say, here's how you configure this so it works best for your company as we make updates. I think we're falling down on the job. And to me, that's the biggest thing right now from a practicality perspective is we need to do something for those HR, because we all leave at the end of the day. We're consultants, right? I mean, let's be honest about who we are and what we do. We say, here, this is great, and we walk out the door, and somebody's left at 2 a.m. trying to figure out how to get payroll run, and there's not enough guidance on that side of it. I think to make this keep going the way we're going.
I would agree, Stacey, with what you just said, and this idea of knowledge transfer. After that, let's say year 1 of project and implementation, it's a big gap, and we see churn on project teams and new folks that may have not been initially involved with the implementation now having to support an application with very poor documentation. And I think that turnover and knowledge transfer and the documentation that goes along with it is really important. I would say from my perspective, what's the advice for the year? Also, this would be going to the vendors and the service providers as well. And that would be, sell what you have today and not this future promise of of AI for HR, ChatGPT or whatever. I think it's the big buzzword. It'll get a lot of initial attention. It seems like that's what everybody's talking about. On the other hand, it's not necessarily real. And if you can't put it into practice as well as get it, implemented, it's just a lot of noise. So let's stick with, what's here today and, sell that, not what's coming in the future. Because, so much of that is just vaporware anyways.
If I could throw one quick one in.
Yeah, sure, Brian.
The other thing I think we got to watch out for is we got to look at this industry in a new light, because there's so much private equity that's moved into the HCM space. Mm-hmm. And those owners have a very different idea of direction where they want to take these companies. And all that has a tremendous impact on the existing customers and the customers to come. They've got, it's great that some of them could put a nice tight financial discipline on companies, but they change executives all the time. They kind of put stress on my clients, because the clients are always trying to figure out where we're going to go now. There's been another material change of control, or the PE firm sold it out. And there's also the activist shareholders are agitating in a couple of big companies too. So there's a bunch of stuff on the externality kind of wave front that I think has got to be looked at as well.
I just want to say that while I can be a little bit rough on vendors around like what I see at shows versus what I think is real, one thing that I really did like this fall is I saw an advance in employee listening frameworks, and this is one area where I think sometimes vendors may be a little ahead of customers, but not necessarily in a bad way, where the ability to kind of take employee sentiment, take the pulse of your employees on a more regular basis and take action around that, rather than this more static approach where once a year you might have a performance review or what have you. Like, I'm encouraged by some of those things, and I liked what I heard from a couple of customers on that, though I really want to do more due diligence on, because I think it's a culture thing, right? Like, even if the technology is there, it doesn't mean that it's easy to suddenly start listening to your employees, right? Because ultimately you're going to get called out if you're hypocritical in your policies. Then more frequent listening is just going to increase the disillusionment. But I'm encouraged that some of the tools for that are developing, and I pressed some questions on that as far as things like, well, what about a bad manager, for example? Because I know, Brian, you've brought that up a lot, and it's a really good question. Like, how do you get out from under a bad manager? And some of these vendors have some pretty decent, interesting answers around how anonymized feedback can be incorporated and such to try to identify that a little more often. So I don't think it's a utopian situation with that, but I like those tools, and I'm interested in how they can be implemented in the future. So that was one thing I took from my fall HR tech shows.
Listening is definitely one of the things that we're seeing people are interested in. It's different from the experience platform. It gets tied a lot to the experience platform, but I think it's a different dialogue. So it's interesting to see that you're seeing it too, John.
I think there's potential there, is all I'm saying. But I do think the tools, in the wrong culture, the tools aren't going to work. They're not going to help at all. It's just going to accelerate the doom and gloom rather than improve it. So we shall see. Folks in the chat, we are just about going to wrap. So now's the time to get your final questions or shots in for these lovely panelists.
My cat's back there saying it's dinner time, John. He's very upset with
Yeah.
you. He's going to open the door.
Yeah.
I think you need to flash the BS meter up some more. Maybe that'll get the last comments coming in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we can do it one more time if you missed it earlier. We do actually, and we're still in the red zone,
Bonnie,
unfortunately.
it's always over you. It's probably
I know.
to have more of it.
Yeah. I have a couple limitations. That's not intentionally meant to tag Bonnie. It's just I have a limitation on where that logo can land at this moment. So so any final thoughts from the group here? Anything that we oh, Tracy likes the BS meter. I've actually, Tracy, I have a different version of it that actually says Enterprise BS meter that I haven't uploaded yet, which is pretty cool. Thanks to the MVPs in the chat. Y'all were great today to really press the conversation. Any final thoughts, things we didn't cover, things you wanted to touch on?
Well, for what it's worth, Meg gets an atomic leadership thanks from me just because she made me bust up laughing in the middle of this whole thing. So thank you for that. I usually try to do that to other people on their podcast or whatever. But yeah, good job, Meg.
Meg got a couple of good hits in there. I was very surprised that we didn't get any armadillo stories or anything, Brian. So I'm expecting him next time. All right.
Yeah.
I get the sense Brian is not going to serve up an armadillo story on demand.
I'm
Come on, Brian.
He's saying no. He's thinking about it. He's got something in mind.
Yeah, it's cooking.
Sorry,
any sneak previews of coming research or events we should be aware of? Anything we should be tracking?
Yeah, there's there are a couple events coming up, right? We got the virtual HR tech conference that's coming up in a few weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So I think some of us are going to be attending some of that as analysts. I know there's an Unleash event. I don't know how many people will be attending that. I don't think I'm going to be able to make that. Anybody else is going to be at the ADP meeting of the minds? I think there's some people who I know our director of research is going to that. Where else we can see each other?
Well, I definitely run in some little bit different circles, but I mean, I'll hit some of the same vendors you guys, and always look forward to seeing y'all at the shows. But I know I'm coming up off the top of my head. I got to go to One Stream Planful. I'm doing a deal with Soho, and who else? I mean, it's amazing to me, depending on the PR person, they either think I'm a finance person or an HR person. So, I've got this schizophrenic travel schedule in front of me. Bonnie, where are we going to see you next?
I will likely be at the meeting of the minds, and my shows are really, balanced out in the summer and fall. So for sure, those coming up.
Well, if you see one of us at shows and you haven't met, don't hesitate to come up and introduce. I think we get smarter through these conversations, so thanks to all of you who participated. And I hope we lived up to your expectations from a bar, speakeasy bar in Vegas, to live virtual stream. Thank you for allowing me to debut my BS meter. Nothing personal, but I did need to try it out. Thanks all. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Later.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.